The same Turkish Sultan, Mohammed the Conqueror, as he was called, who had seized Constantinople in 1453, was now carrying on warfare in the Mediterranean. He had a large navy and launched it against various Christian ports. In the summer of the year 1480, the Muslim Turks launched a powerful military expedition against southern Italy. They assaulted the Italian city of Otranto, taking it by surprise and storming it. 22,000 of Otranto's people fell into the hands of the Turks. 12,000 were killed, many after refusing offers to spare their lives if they converted to Islam. The rest were sold into slavery. The Archbishop of Otranto stood fast at the altar of his cathedral. The Turks sawed him in two after deliberately killing every priest and cleric in the city. The Church still honors these men as the martyrs of Otranto. Spain responded at once. A great expedition to regain Otranto began to be prepared, with many volunteers and much enthusiasm. The storming of Otranto and the ensuing massacre was a warning to all Christendom of the magnitude of the danger that had arisen because of the extent of the Turkish conquests. Turkish ships and men could go anywhere in the Mediterranean Sea, seize any port, and wreak similar devastation. Though they had not yet reached Spain, it would be very easy for them to do so. Any Spanish port could become another Otranto. And there were tens of thousands in Spain who might well rise to greet invading, slaughtering Turks as liberators. The False Conversos. Conversos, as I've explained, were those Spanish Christians who had converted from Islam or Judaism, or were descended from converted Muslims or Jews 1 or 2 or 3 generations back. Many of these conversions were genuine, or if the original conversion was not genuine, the living descendant of the original convert had always been or had become a sincere, believing Catholic. But conversions of Muslims or Jews in Spain to Christianity, at least for the preceding century, had often been stimulated by ambition and greed, or by fear, particularly when there was widespread mob violence against non-Christians. That happened increasingly during the century preceding Isabel's coronation, when there was a tremendous decline of law and order in Castile. There were many acts of lawlessness and violence, including mob attacks upon Jews. There is convincing, indeed overwhelming evidence, which even the most critical modern historians have acknowledged, that tens of thousands of false conversos, who did not believe in the Christianity they professed, and by all indications never had believed in it, continued to live secretly by the teachings and rites of their former religion. Many had risen high in society, even in the church. Some were priests who mocked the Mass as they said it. No one can excuse the pogroms, the threats, and violence that drove some of these conversos unwillingly into the church. But by no means all of them, and probably only a minority, entered in this way. The rest chose to do so, and there was no one to ascertain what their motives might have been, or those of their descendants. Every false converso in Spain was a potential traitor, a man capable of, and very possibly inclined to, opening the gates to the likes of the Turkish mass killers of Otranto, welcoming the invader into the land to kill his countrymen, and saw bishops in two. And by the same token, every converso, and there were now millions of them, including Queen Isabel's saintly confessor, Hernando de Talavera, her choice as Bishop of Cuenca, Alonso de Burgos, and the husband of her dearest friend, Andres de Cabrera. All of these, and many like them, were open to the suspicion of infidelity and treason, their reputations and careers forever in jeopardy of a false accusation. The Inquisition is the centerpiece of the black legend of Spanish history. Some aspects of its work are undoubtedly very offensive to the modern student. though it is necessary always to keep in mind that regardless of our sensibilities, we live in the bloodiest century in all history, in which millions of victims of Nazi and communist totalitarianism died in almost inconceivable agony, while the sympathizers and appeasers and frightened subjects of each kept silent. But at least the historian has a duty to put the Spanish Inquisition in perspective. It did not engage in mass murder. The contemporary historian Pulgar estimates the total number of those burned to death because of the Inquisition's findings during Isabel's reign as no more than 2,000, an average of about 100 per year. Some 15,000 were found guilty of false profession of Christianity, but were reconciled with the Church in the public ceremony known as the auto de fe, and that means act of faith. That is, of public confession of their error and reconciliation with the faith they had previously rejected. Because on that same occasion, the few, usually those who had been found guilty twice, who were deemed irreconcilable, were burned to death, the term auto de fe has come to mean, for those who know no Spanish, burning at the stake. But the number reconciled was always much larger than the number burned. And the phrase itself does not mean burning at the stake, but act of faith, referring to those who were reconciled. In other words, it was the reconciliation that people focused on and not the burning. But a large majority of those questioned by the Inquisition were completely cleared. Of the 100,000 questioned during Isabel's reign, 85,000 were completely cleared. Later on, in the next century, among those cleared were the famous St. Ignatius of Loyola, founder of the Jesuits, and St. Teresa of Avila, founder of the Reformed Carmelites, and all so-called witches, whose cases were brought before the Inquisition in the next century. For them, the Inquisition was a shield against calumny. The Inquisition had no jurisdiction over practicing Jews and Muslims, only over professed Christians who in fact were still Jews or Muslims, though concealing it. There were some initial abuses in the Inquisition, but they were eliminated following the appointment of Tomás de Torquemada as Inquisitor General for Castile in 1483. After this, beginning with his leadership, the inquisitorial tribunals were generally very fair. Many Spaniards preferred to have their cases heard before them rather than other courts. Those questioned were not allowed to face their accusers because of the danger of blood feuds and revenge seeking if their identity were known. But no one could be confined by the Inquisition, even briefly, without the prior testimony of 3 witnesses against him. And the first thing done when a man was called before the Inquisition was to ask him to make a list of all his personal enemies, whose testimony was then immediately thrown out. No anonymous testimony or denunciation was permitted. The accused had a defense attorney, often 2, though these were assigned by the Inquisition. The Inquisition did sometimes use torture in questioning witnesses against whom there was strong evidence but who refused to admit any of it. Torture was never used in more than a minority of cases, and even more rarely during Isabel's reign and Torquemada's period as the head of the Inquisition. Torture was an evil that should not have been permitted, but it was a common evil of the age, found in many other courts and countries, against which few then even protested. The Inquisition was a church court because by Catholic belief, only the Church has the right to decide whether a man is or is not a Christian. That's what the Inquisition was deciding.